Sustainable You is a casual, interactive, yet informative series detailing and cataloging the sustainability experience. Moreover, this is a short podcast docuseries detailing the thoughts and experiences of passionate advocates towards all things eco-friendly. Our journey is to know how and why understanding sustainable development towards the triple bottom line of people, profit, and planet can contribute to a more mindful, holistic, and inclusive world. Specifically, this podcast showcases what makes you a changemaker, innovator, and transformer as you tackle sustainability challenges for current and future generations to resolve those so-called wicked problems. Hi everyone, this is Rachel. As you know, I'm your host for the Sustainable You podcast docuseries that some of you may have been following for the past handful of months. Maybe some of you are subscribers and have become regular listeners. So I noticed I haven't done anything with my personal perspective, even though I've been releasing these different episodes for the last little bit, and I wanted to share my own personal experience specifically on studying abroad in Sweden. So just to give a bit of a background as to who I am. So originally I am from Calgary, Alberta, Canada, and I went abroad to Sweden for the past year to do grad school. So I was there at Uppsala University, campus Gotland, in which I was in grad school for sustainable management. Now, I specifically chose Sweden within Scandinavia, I guess basically for two reasons. Of course, we're always hearing in the media how that part of the world is known for really championing a sustainable lifestyle, a very eco-friendly lifestyle, which is actually quite true when you've been there. They're pretty authentic about it. And also, just to backtrack a bit, during my undergrad at the University of Calgary, I did my exchange in Finland for the Alto Ventures program. Basically, we're launching new tech startups. It was like a boot camp. We had launched a climate tech prototype startup, I guess you can say, for social impact. And I really liked how it was there, even though technically, I guess, Finland is not Scandinavian, it's more Nordic, but it's like the principles basically overlap. So I wanted to kind of continue on that path because I had kind of sampled it during that summer exchange during my bachelor's and decided to go back to grad school. And before that, before I contemplated going for a career change, I was a former journalist / reporter / digital marketer. So yeah, I had a bit of a background going into that and of course starting this podcast project. And as I had mentioned before, this podcast basically started as a pet project, as a class assignment. So in one of our courses, our instructors had given us an assignment of making a regular podcast series. And because I was the most knowledgeable in my group on doing this and being a content creator, I was a go-to person for kind of handling everything from the get-go. So yeah, from there it kind of flourished and I've been continuing with that ever since I finished grad school and I returned back to Canada. So yeah, and I guess those are kind of my key reasons for why I chose specifically Sweden. Like at the time I'd known I'd wanted to go to that part of the world. Preferably I wanted to go to Denmark, but I couldn't find my program. And I had I wanted to do something around specifically sustainability and business, but I didn't want to do like a generic MBA, kind of like what we have here in Canada and I imagine the US, where it's just, a standard MBA with, I guess, sustainability tacked onto it, or kind of like those ethical ESG principles you want to learn about. It's not really integrated into the core of its curriculum. So I kind of figured, okay, well, I want to look for a bit of a unique program, and of course they have these Masters of Management programs rolling out as of recently, even here at my alma mater, TU Calgary, but it was just again the standard Master of Management degree. If you don't want to go for the MBA, this is kind of like a stepping stone for like a career pivot, I guess you can say, and I thought that was cool how they kind of merged the two, and it was perfect, and it was in a part of the world I wanted to go to. So yeah, and this was, I think, like it wasn't my first attempt applying for grad school, because I know when I finished my undergrad, I decided to work for a couple of years. My goal was 2, and it ended up being 3. And then I decided, no, I need to kind of finish school because I find it's difficult to return once you've graduated. And so, yeah, so I guess researched different schools. Again, this was not my top choice, Uppsala University. I kind of came across it during random Google search, and then I really did my research on various grad schools. But I think this was definitely my third choice, because I had considered schools here in Canada and the UK and other places abroad, but ultimately I committed to this one just because it was perfect. It was only about a year. It wasn't too long, and it was pretty affordable, and it was on the best part, it was on, I guess, an island, so that was pretty cool, an island on the Baltic Sea. So the campus itself is in Visby, Gotland, Sweden, not on the mainland of Sweden, so you'd have to take a ferry, about a 3-hour ferry ride from Stockholm to get there, but they also have a mini airport. And a lot of people don't know about that because Campus Gotland is really known mostly for either its sustainability programs, both bachelor's and master's, and also for its gaming. Game design is the biggest program there, which was surprising. But I guess it makes sense because it has the island vibes and it has like that Zen environment, I guess, to study those sorts of things. So I guess just based off of, my undergrad experience, always hearing about Scandinavia and Sweden, doing a short summer exchange, and then having visited there before, it kind of gave me a sample teaser of what to expect, so I didn't go in there head first. I kind of had an idea, which is what I always recommend to anyone, to do a shorter exchange before you commit to maybe going to grad school longer term. And then, and so then I ended up resigning a job at the time in digital marketing, and then I left about, I would say, end of August in 2023, and the program lasted until about end of May, June-ish, and then I stayed a bit back to travel. So it's definitely a very eye-opening experience. So you never know where you're going to end up. I would definitely be open to exploring other options, because if I had been very adamant about it has to be, Copenhagen, it has to be in Denmark, it has to be Norway, which I'd prefer, I think I'd be, it's not good to be a perfectionist. I wouldn't be able to find that program specifically, and it was just nice I met most of my criteria, if not all. So that's kind of the main reason why I chose Uppsala University, Campus Gotland in Visby, Sweden. And just to go on to the next point, so the graduate school program itself consisted of 6 courses, but just to backtrack a bit, so I went for a master's in sustainable business management, and again, you have to understand that business degrees, they're a little bit different than they are here. There, at least, it depends on what you're doing, whereas I find that the North American standard is very much doing a standard MBA, and it's a very professional based, whereas there they have both options of it being either a professional-based course or a thesis-based course. And this was, of course, a research-based thesis program, so you would have to do original research and pass a thesis in order to pass the program. So it was definitely less applied, which was definitely a curveball for me because I did not do a lot of independent studies during my undergrad, which was in anthropology, social and cultural anthropology. So it was definitely, I guess, the most difficult part of the program. But again, I kind of anticipated we weren't going to learn very standard, those standard, business principles. And they weren't going to give us those very concrete tools. It was going to be a bit more experimental. I just didn't expect how experimental it would be. It was pretty, I would say, it's not what I expected. But I can just go into, the different courses, I guess, that I took there. So the core programming consisted of 6 courses plus the thesis course, which was the longest and worth the most credits. I believe that was at least 15 credits, whereas the rest were 45, so it was about 60 credits in total. So the first course was Business, Society, and Nature, and this really gets into, I guess, business ethics and the different, the ethos behind conducting proper business and responsible business. So it was kind of almost an introduction to corporate sustainability, but I didn't expect the level of philosophy that we would learn. So again, in Canada in standard business schools, the curriculum, we don't really learn about business ethics. So it was definitely not what I expected. So it was definitely about more of business philosophy, which was interesting. And just kind of, different, just discussing different theories. So that was definitely, and like different like dilemmas and like, critical thinking skills sort of thing. And that was definitely an eye-opening experience for sure. I wouldn't say there's anything particular that stood out to me. I would say it was the most difficult course because they made us write an exam. And again, to go back on that, I wanted to mention when I was just giving an intro to the program that the Swedish education system is much different from the Canadian or even the American one. I believe like even any English-speaking one, it would be different because they have a pass-fail system, so they don't have our standard 4.0 GPA. It is very much based on it's either all or nothing. So they are focused more on the genuine learning experience. They don't really care in that sense that you just passed with like a 3.5 to them. It matters more that you genuinely learn the material. So the pressure is definitely off and they don't have this competitive edge. And I didn't really feel that competition amongst classmates compared to when I did my undergrad. I'm here in Canada, so it's definitely, that was definitely interesting because it's definitely a more lax approach, but I felt I absorbed more of the content because we weren't ever pressured to learn it and there was no GPA to really maintain. So they have either a pass-fail or basically you can redo it, so it's pass-fail sort of thing. So it's kind of nice because you kind of, if you fail, it's your first attempt in learning and you can keep failing until you actually learn what they're trying to teach you. So and I think that's why I probably absorbed a lot more than I ever did in my undergrad. So that was interesting. But going back to this first course, Business, Society, and Nature, is the only one with an exam. But it was definitely, the more difficult one. And I would have liked more case studies, but again, that wasn't necessarily what they did. They really make you dissect. Again, they don't give you concrete examples. You have to kind of dissect it and theorize over everything, and they talk about things like care ethics and stuff like that. And if it's unheard of, and it really has like a almost eco-feminist appeal to it. So that was definitely very interesting. And then the next course would be engaged leadership and responsible behavior. So this was more of like the tech focused and the social impact related stuff. And again, it builds on like that, I guess, care ethics theme where they're talking about, helping those who are marginalized and underrepresented in society. And they talk about things like the forces of reproduction. And again, that eco-feminist vibe comes out again. And I don't know if it was just the vibe of the island, but I definitely felt they had like this feminist vibe about them, which I didn't expect. It was very more of a leftist progressive stance, and it made sense because a lot of the instructors were women, but I personally thought I enjoyed it because I thought it was empowering. But a lot of, I know, classmates who were not women or female identifying, they were irked by it a little bit. But I think that was interesting because this kind of this course especially goes into things like social entrepreneurship and running social enterprises, which I've always found fascinating, and innovation and becoming a change maker, transformer in society. So it was definitely an eye-opening course, and it's also the one where this podcast docuseries emerged. And just to go a bit back on that, I had always done like freelancing and writing my own column for my campus paper, the Gauntlet, at the University of Calgary before that. So I kind of had an idea of how I was going to plan out our programming and whatnot, and it was really just left to me because I was the only one that had that background in digital media and content creation. So that was definitely really interesting. And I'm trying to think if there's any key learning from that, because it was interesting because they don't necessarily teach you how to build the prototype, so it's not a typical case competition or boot camp in that sense, which is, I think, more what I was looking for, but it's still nonetheless really interesting. I think the concept we had presented on for a group project was something to do with a social support service for people with, like, seniors, mostly in disabilities, where you connect, I guess, youth with them. And it was some sort of like a social exchange, social support platform, which is interesting. So one of my group members had pitched it. So that was definitely really interesting. And and going on to the next one, So the next course was governance, organizations, and society, and it's probably one of my more favorite ones and the one I did well in. But basically, it talks about things like, how we see this overload of eco certifications and eco labeling and greenwashing, and how do we have, how do we set the public policy and the regulations to, I guess, filter that all out. And to me, that was really interesting because I was interested in studying law and whatnot, so that was definitely pretty interesting. It was a pretty hands-off course, and I had a lot of dense readings, but it was nice because I think the only assignment basically was to organize this big Ecolution conference where we gathered different stakeholders from the island, Stockholm, Visby and whatnot, and they presented at this big conference that we hosted. And yeah, it was basically just writing about that experience, and I was on 3 different teams. It was like overkill, but it was definitely interesting in that sense, that it wasn't a typical paper like it was in the previous courses. Yeah, and I think that really piqued my interest because I was really interested in the application side of sustainable development and business, and it was, and I didn't really see that as much in the previous courses as much, so it was definitely very interesting, and I could kind of relate to the different kind of news stories I broke, like the single-use plastics ban in Canada a couple of years ago, and how it was overturned, and how, these different regulations work. So it was definitely interesting, and that's more of what I wanted to learn, I think, about these different sustainability metrics, and I wish they had expanded more on that. It wasn't the case, because again, going back, they have these month-long courses, their semester, even though they have 2 semesters, just to go into the formatting, the course itself is 1 month, so 1 month equals 1 course, and they don't really have a winter break. You still need to study over the winter break because you have exams when you get back, whereas of course in Canada, imagine the US, you would do your courses, and then in December or April or whatever, you would sit for your exams. So it was definitely a little bit different because you had to study over the winter break sort of thing, and then, right when you get back from the winter holidays, you had to sit for an exam. But yeah, that one was definitely interesting. And then getting into the next course, so this one was a very short block week course, and it's fun by so fast that I didn't really get to absorb a lot of the content, which is unfortunate, and I find that they should have extended it. But it was an environmental justice course, so it's called Globalization, Resources, and Environmental Justice. So yeah, I guess the title says it itself. So basically we're looking again at things like environmental conservation and kind of acknowledging those underrepresented perspectives again. And we talked about the founding father of environmental justice, Julian Eggman, in the US, and kind of how these different BIPOC communities tend to have the most, the least amount of greenery and shrubbery, the most noise of pollution, things like that, and they also face the aftermath and consequences of pollution from a lot of these industrial polluters. So it's definitely interesting, and for me, I really wanted to learn about things like green gentrification in general and urban planning, so that was pretty interesting. But again, it was a super short 1 week course, I think a week or so, and then so I didn't get to absorb much of it, but then they had an exam when we got back from the holidays. But yeah, it was definitely, this is one I didn't expect I would like as much, and I did, because you don't get to really talk about again in business schools about things like racial discrimination and how it's connected to environmental stewardship and things like that. So yeah, that was definitely interesting. And then the last couple of courses that we had here didn't really have to do with any concrete sustainability principles. They were just more to support the thesis. So this was first the philosophy of science. So this was just a basic research methods course. So philosophy of science and research methods. That's all it was. Very cut and dry. It's pretty, I guess for some it might be boring, but if you've done academic research, it might be interesting to you. But it was just interesting to learn about the different epistemological and ontological perspectives, and I didn't get to do an independent study during my undergrad, even for any of my major or my minor, so it was definitely interesting for sure. Yeah, and it was nice because they were pretty flexible about how you approach research, and just kind of seeing how with the previous alumni, how they did their theses. It seemed like it was a pretty experimental school in terms of the kind of content they publish, at least I thought at the time. But yeah, that was just what it was, just a basic research methods course. And then, of course, last but not least was your reading, research, and writing course. So this felt like a merging of creative writing with academia somehow. And I don't know how they had this creative destruction, but I feel like they wanted us to be creative and experimental while still adhering to these standard academic standards. But I really enjoyed it because the exercises we did really prompted you. The writing prompts the instructor gave really made you think. The instructor was good, pretty good herself, because she was, I think, the new chancellor of Campus Gotland or something like that. So she was very invested in what she was teaching us. And for me, I never really thought about things like, poetry, and I had recited a spoken word poem on biomimicry and the theory I was using, and the lotus flower. And it was really good. Like, you usually don't get to use this kind of, poetics and art and this kind of, these concepts in academia, because it's usually pretty conservative. So, yeah, I enjoyed this more than the research methods course. Not that that wasn't good, but I absorbed a lot out of it. It wasn't what I expected. And because I've previously been a content writer, and being a journalist, you're always sort of writing. So yeah, I definitely gleaned a lot off of it. Okay, great. So those were the 6 courses that I mentioned. And then, of course, the remaining one was a thesis, which is a big chunk of the program. And it runs for a couple of months. But again, they also have the same kind of revise and resubmit system that we have here for submitting any graduate school thesis, so you can fail multiple times before you pass. I, of course, did not know that at the time because I didn't understand the Swedish education system as clearly as the one here we have in Canada, but and the defending the thesis is kind of a different concept, and they also let you do it in pairs, so it's not what I expected, but it was a good learning experience, and I think I learned most off of that, because a lot of these courses, of course, if you want to study sustainability at the grad school level, a lot of these courses you learn if you've taken sustainability before that, which I had in my undergrad. I had taken a certificate as part of my degree, an embedded certificate. So for me, it was a reiteration of previous concepts. It only went a little bit more in depth, but it was really the original research that I had to do, which was more of a learning curve for me. And I definitely gained more off of that than just these different courses. And I think that was the whole point of the program, because they didn't want to do, a standard MBA sort of approach to things. So yeah, I won't get today into the details of the thesis writing process, because that can be an entire dialogue in and of itself, and I am by no means any expert on it, so I'm just going to leave it there when it comes to the different coursework. So yeah, definitely interesting for sure. And again, it was nice that it's a shorter program, so at the end of the day, if it's not for you, at least you're not going to be stuck there for a couple of years, or if it is, at least you're done and over with, and you can continue on to schooling if that's what you want to do. But for me, I kind of knew a couple months in, maybe I don't know if I want to pursue this further, even though I'm still passionate about it, and hence why I'm exploring different avenues right now. But yeah, if you're looking for something that integrates sustainable development plus business management principles into its core, that is a spin-off of a typical management degree, then I definitely recommend it. You have to do a lot of the legwork on your own. They're definitely not going to hold your hand. That's another thing I wanted to mention. I think I can just do another episode and just talking about the Swedish education system, but they definitely are more independent-minded thinkers, and I'm not saying that we aren't here in Canada, again, or even the US, but I definitely find that professors here definitely hold our hand through the curriculum and everything else. So for example, we have more of a casual style where we have office hours with our professors, and they're very open about you dropping in, or we even have our TAs, and you can always schedule an appointment, and it's very collaborative and interactive, and it's encouraged. Whereas here, I noticed in Sweden, it was very much independent. They're very hands-off. Office hours aren't listed. You only book the mandatory appointments with your professor, and even not then. They really encourage you to do it, use those critical thinking skills on your own and to be more independent-minded. And I definitely noticed that among my classmates. They didn't really seek out that validation they needed during the thesis writing process, especially the Swedish students, which I thought was kind of jarring. So I definitely think the North American standard is hand-holding a little bit more than we need to when it comes to post-secondary education. So yeah, just keep that in mind if you ever want to go to that part of the world. It definitely will be a different kind of a learning experience. And so just to go on to this next point, so yeah, again, I chose Visby, Gotland, Sweden, because it was a fairy tale-esque island on, the oasis, I guess you could say, of the Baltic Sea. And to me, that really piqued my interest because I had never lived on an island before. So again, I come from Alberta, which is a landlocked province in Western Canada. So if any of you seen it on a map before, and we don't really have, an ocean or even a sea. We have rivers, but we don't really have that kind of a, I guess, geographical distribution. So for me, living on a small island and being able to commute to Stockholm by ferry all the time was kind of cool to me, because I've always kind of wanted to live in kind of like those harbor-esque kind of small towns. But yeah, small town Sweden, like it's definitely, it's funny, I was telling a friend too the other day, I'm like, they make a reference to it in the Barbie movie, I'm sure that a lot of you have watched, and it is really like that. I definitely got strong feminist vibes, not just from the curriculum of the program and the instructors there, but from the island and the Swedish people themselves. Like I've noticed women there, they seemed a bit, like, not that I'm saying we're not empowered in Canada, they seem to be a bit more, like, I guess, like independent-minded in that sense, and I just don't know if it's the policies there and more, women running for office sort of thing, but yeah, I definitely noticed, there's a bit of a difference there. So again, I intentionally chose that island after kind of narrowing down my options. I'm like, okay, Uppsala University, Campus Scotland seems nice, and maybe a small town vibe will be different, because I come from, I guess, not a big city, but a medium-sized city where I live currently, my hometown of Calgary. So it was definitely a nice change of pace, because again, in a small town vibe, you have a smaller campus, there's not that many students, and you get to know each other and the locals and whatnot. So yeah, it's good in that sense. Like, you maybe get a more tight-knit community and it's a slower pace to life, but of course you are giving up the amenities and the facilities that you maybe would normally find convenient. So for me, I decided to take on a lifestyle change, a sustainability eco-challenge. So I don't know if you've ever read the book, at least some have, but it kind of prompted me to study more about sustainability. But I came across this book, No Impact Man, after I came back from a trip from India in 2015. So the first time when I went as a kid, I was shocked at the amount of poverty. The second time was pollution. And then I happened to just come across this book as part of my university's common reading program. It was really eye-opening to see how this New York blogger took on a eco lifestyle challenge for a year. And he just went, no car, no red meat, no this, no that. And he really aimed to achieve that net zero lifestyle. And I guess in a sense for me, I had the opportunity to mimic that, because when I was there, I realized this is a perfect backdrop for this, because again, there's limited access to different facilities. So for example, their bus route didn't go to campus really. You had to either walk or you had to bike, and for the duration of the whole year, I had biked. So I got a bike rental, and that's what I relied on, and I've never biked as much as I did in my life before, which is kind of shocking to me. And I even ended up biking in the snow. So that's another thing I learned. Swedes actually bike in the snow. Can you believe that? So that kind of shocked me when I saw that. I'm like, oh my god, like in Canada, you never see people biking in the snow. Like, but for them, it's like for us, it's more of a leisurely thing where we bike, not really commuting in a sense, but for them it's a survival thing. Like, they'll be transporting their children to school, buying groceries, and I've saw so many fancy contraptions attached to these different bikes. So the EU in general, not just Sweden, but like, Denmark, Scandinavia, and the EU in general, Amsterdam, places like that, they're just big on bike riding. I can see why now, but the island was perfect for that, because it's just designed well for bikes, and you don't really have aggressive drivers like we do here in my hometown. Again, maybe that's North America, I don't know, but people, like, drivers generally stop to let you pass because there's just so many bikes everywhere. Like, it's crazy. I've never seen that biking to that level before. But yeah, so basically took on this sustainability challenge or eco challenge for the year, and I'm trying to think about what I kind of gave up for that, because it was quite a bit. Yeah, but like I said, it was definitely growing pains for sure, because I don't think I've ever done that. But yeah, so basically, again, I was commuting by biking, so no car. I didn't even get a car rental. Like, I was pretty adamant on that. Like, I would even take my bike onto, like, the buses when I wanted to go on those kind of, like, side trips. So yeah, and even onto the ferry. So it was pretty dedicated to that. And another one, so they don't have clothing dryers there. Get this. They hang dry only. And I thought that was maybe just a quirky thing, because the first time when I had gone to Scandinavia to Norway, I saw the family I was living with doing that. And I'm like, okay, well, they don't have a clothing dryer. Maybe that's just them trying to be, energy efficient. Like, it's just their household. But when you've actually been here longer and you've spoken to people, they're like, no, like, I lived in a family of 4. If you talk to someone, and we never had a clothing dryer growing up. So I'm like, wow, we are really, I don't want to say privileged, but like, maybe we are, maybe we're entitled here in Canada, and again, North America in general, because we like our big Hummer. Like, people like their big Hummers, and they even take it to go to the grocery store across the street, which is kind of sad, but they don't really kind of believe in that lifestyle. So yeah, hang drying was definitely, not what I expected, and it actually made me appreciate my clothes a lot more, and wanting to have, again, a capsule wardrobe, because you don't want to deal with all that clutter and that headache of having so many clothes. So that was definitely interesting. And again, dishwashers, I didn't see as many dishwashers there. I, of course, had to hand wash because I had just one of those, like, bachelorette heads, like a student apartment, I guess you can say. But yeah, hand washing dishes, which we should be doing anyways, by the way. And I didn't see, and I guess going back to the clothing, I didn't use a lot of fabric softener, so I didn't really see much of anyone using it. So just, again, being less about using those chemical preservatives, if you want to go back to that, and, like, not reducing our reliance on things like fast fashion. And then this next one is interesting, so and controversial in a sense, because it always kind of irked people in my class during discussions. So reducing consumption of animal products, so no red meat or dairy milk. So on this first point, I've never really been a fan of red meat for, like, health purposes, and it causes things like hormonal imbalances, and I'm not the biggest fan of its taste. But here in Alberta, of course, my hometown, they're known, of course, for loving Alberta beef, so I kind of maybe didn't expect as much. But in Sweden, they're also big on eating things like, like pork and red meat and stuff like that. So it was interesting because I didn't expect, I think it's just in academia, because I noticed this during my undergrad, when we talked about veganism in my sustainability studies courses. It was just very much a bubble and niche to my classmates, so it's very much the academic community that believes in things like, plant-based protein and stuff like that, and not eating red meat. And I observed the same when I was there, but they were more adamant about it. I don't want to say dedicated, they're really adamant about it, especially some of the German students. Because, again, Germany is also really big on veganism. Maybe next to Scandinavia or Sweden, Germany is the next biggest into that lifestyle. So it always struck a chord with people in class. And yeah, I noticed a lot of the grad students that were studying anything to do with sustainability, a lot of them were vegans or vegetarian, mostly vegans. So yeah, that was interesting. So I had no issues doing that. Not that, because I was still, like, building my cooking skills. Not that I would have been big on eating it, but I definitely noticed they just have better options too. Like, here in Canada, it's getting better for substitutes when it comes to red meat, but they're not as good. Like, you would go to, like, a McDonald's there and you would they had a McVegan, and it tasted pretty good. It's not like the watered down stuff here, except maybe I would say A&W and the Beyond Meat stuff is pretty good. But you'd go to any, like, one of those big burger joints, like they have Max's, which is like their version of, like, McDonald's, I guess you can say, their own chain that everyone eats at, and they had really good options for a plant-based beef burger, and so that really surprised me. It tasted pretty good. It wasn't Beyond Meat, but it wasn't red meat. It was some sort of plant-based protein, so I had no issues doing that. And the second thing was dairy milk. So again, cow's milk, just with the hormones, and stuff like that, and preservatives, I've never really been a fan, so I always like buying organic here in Canada. But one thing is really big there, which is oat milk, Oatly. I don't know if you've heard of it, but I really got hooked onto it when I came across it during my summer exchange. Thankfully, they had it here, and it tasted way better than regular milk. I always bought Oatly, and they had different flavors. It was amazing, and then that was the one product I was going to miss, and thankfully and luckily enough, it was like, because my jaw dropped when it came here. I was at like a London Drugs, which is like a drugstore here, and they brought it here, and we usually don't get Swedish goods as much, so I was really excited to get Oatly. But Oatly makes plant-based milk bearable, and the options in Canada really suck because I've tried all of them pretty much for oat milk. They're really just not good. They're mostly nasty. So at least from my perspective, so like Oatly is like addicting, and it makes everything taste really good. And yeah, so I had no issues going down that path of not having any sort of animal products as much, and easily I swapped for substitutes. And the next one was, of course, buying groceries frequently. So the nice thing about not having a car is that you're going to have minimal amount of food waste. You don't have things like Costco or these big outlets where you're just going to hoard and stack up food. And of course we saw how during COVID and, you know, the quarantine and lockdown here, basically people went a little crazy during, you know, that time of hoarding and the lockdown and everything, like you know, as if food is going to run out, not just toilet paper. So yeah, it made me question that when I was there, because they don't really have big outlets like Costco. They have this Opia, but it's not, by no means is it like Costco. So I had to buy groceries more frequently, and I had to obviously bike there, and they just remained fresh longer, so I didn't necessarily hoard, and I found that I didn't have as much food waste, which is really nice. I think that's the best way to go, and most people should go that, and just be, you know, just buy more frequently and not in bulk and hoard, unless it's like a really good purchase. So that was interesting. And another thing I would say is, of course, I tried to reduce processed foods by substituting with natural products. So I do find that I was eating healthier, and I don't know if it's just because of biking, but my diet did improve. Not that I was adhering to a specific diet, like, you know, Mediterranean or anything like that, or, you know, yeah, I wasn't really, or paleo diet, I wasn't doing anything like that, but just the process of like biking so much and not buying as many groceries and hoarding maybe gets you into the mindset of not eating as much processed foods, which is kind of nice. And of course, I would say that on this last point, I definitely consume less overall. So I definitely got into the mindset, like this mindfulness and minimalism and more conscious consumerism, because I didn't really have excessive consumption, and I didn't do as much anxiety shopping, unless of course towards the end and in between too, when you wanted to buy a souvenir, of course. It wasn't this like the way we are in North America, and I don't want to compare and contrast and like just make it essentialist or even pigeonhole anything, but I definitely notice here we're more obsessed with commodity. And I'm not saying that they don't have hyperconsumption. Again, I was in a small town in Sweden where there's things like, you know, like things like Amazon Prime. They don't really exist in a place like that because of shipping. It wouldn't make any sense because it's too remote. But I didn't really miss it in that sense. Like you hear of people now with 1 day and 2 day shipping, and they would never be able to live without that. But I think you don't necessarily need that. Like it is going to be a detox at first, because at the first few months, it really shocked me that they don't have, and again, in a small town you expect that, but even when you went to Stockholm, you didn't see these big, colossal walk-in, drive-in shopping malls. These huge outlets with stores like we see here, they just didn't really exist. Like they had the bigger malls when you went to like the bigger cities, but they didn't really necessarily have that. It was just a nice shopping mall strip where I was living in Visby. So yeah, and I think people, you know, they focus more on things like relationship building, not necessarily on, you know, the love of commodity and consumption. So yeah, that really surprised me, and it kind of explains why the campus community was pretty tight-knit. Maybe not necessarily in my class. People maybe weren't as close or anything, but outside of that, like the students, you know, they didn't spend their time, you know, like they spend their time more with each other and stuff like that. So, and relationship building, which is interesting. So yeah, it's definitely, I'm trying to think of how my sustainability challenge on the island went. Yeah, but I think that's pretty much it in terms of that. And I'm trying to think what else I did that was really sustainable, but I think just some of these, like just giving up a car, yeah, just not eating red meat and stuff like that was pretty big as is. And in general, I find I wasn't wearing as much makeup. I embrace, more of a natural look, which is nice. And I normally don't wear too much, but I kind of just like the slower pace of the island. It didn't really have this, like, you didn't have to put on this, like, maybe upkept persona that you normally do, maybe living in a city, which is really nice. But yeah, I think that would be it in terms of my eco challenge that I took on. But yeah, just going on to this next point. So I really do, again, recommend studying abroad. So why should you study abroad? There's so many reasons, a numerous amount of reasons, but I'm trying to think. Well, first things first, do a bit of a sample if you can. So don't commit to like a year-long or even a couple-year-long graduate school program. First, do like a shorter exchange during your undergrad, because a lot of times your university will pay for it with local tuition. So you would only, for example, pay Canadian currency. And I remember talking to some students who they just wanted to zip through their undergrad. They didn't want to look into study abroad because they're like, oh, it's too expensive and stuff like that. But they didn't bother doing their research. And when you look into it, you can even do, a summer. If you can't work it into your coursework during the year, you can do it like a short month-long exchange like I did during the summer, and you're just going to pay your tuition fees. You don't pay double international tuition fees or anything like that. So it's definitely worth it, and normally you can get financial aid for that. So if you can commit to a shorter one in the same geographic region in the world, if you have family or friends that live there too, go for it. Then you'll at least know this is kind of like a teaser. It's like the upcoming attractions of what I can expect. And then later on, if you decide to commit to something longer. So for me, like a year was pretty much enough at this point. Like I anticipated going longer, maybe for more schooling, but I'm right now contemplating going in another direction. So I think you'll be more likely to commit to it in that sense. I'm trying to think what else would I suggest to someone that wants to go. So yeah, that would be for one, just maybe sampling it out. Another thing would create a spreadsheet, and you don't have to jump into it right away. Like I said, I worked for a few years. I only planned on working for 2. It became a little bit more than that as a journalist and digital marketer. So I couldn't really find anything in my field of sustainability, and decided to just take whatever jobs I could and do it, like you give it an eco spin, for example, for pitching certain news stories. So I would definitely work, and I'll help you save up when you do go abroad, but also give you a different perspective and influence how you approach your coursework. Whereas you might not get that if you go directly from your bachelor's to your master's. So, for example, being a reporter, you get those like interviewing skills, and when you get into like the thesis writing process, you have to do a lot of pitching to different companies depending on like what your subject matter is, and you have to conduct a lot of interviews and transcribing, synthesize a lot of information. So I definitely recommend maybe working for a bit as well. And what else? Yeah, and I feel like be genuine about it. Like if you're not ready for it, you don't necessarily have to go. But if you do, I think it's worth it. So for me, like, yes, it's because I did all these things. I was confident enough to make this decision. But sometimes things may not still work out. So just keep that in mind. I wanted to add before this spiel, this in-depth convo on my perspective began. So I also chose it for another fun reason. Like these were the more, I guess, serious reasons as to why I chose this. And again, going back to my undergrad, 2 things that really stood out to me was journalism and sustainability and business sort of things. So yeah, so for me, I found that this was the right path to go, even though I might not keep going beyond the master's, or I may one day. I just wanted to kind of do the 1 year, and 1 year is not too much. It's about a 10-month program. And a lot of people do go to the EU. They do their maybe bachelor's in Canada or the US, and they go to the EU for these shorter master's programs, because they're a bit more flexible. And the really nice thing is that you can, in your off time, you can travel to all these different, locations, and you can, if you're a travel bug, you can just hop on, a cheap flight and go somewhere and jet off. And that's what a lot of my classmates actually did during these study breaks. And in Canada, we don't really have much of that choice. Whereas in the EU, you have all these like different destinations to choose from. But I definitely suggest planning it out because my traveling skills were a bit shabby coming out of the quarantine and COVID. So I had to get back into the groove of that. And by the way, another thing, what I found out when I was in Sweden is they didn't really have a COVID lockdown and quarantine or shutdown because we had interviewed these local business owners and they didn't have these issues of business closures or anything like that. So they didn't have these necessary mandated vaccination policies that we had and these vaccination passports, which were crazy in Canada again, and in Alberta especially, but they did not have that. So that shocked me. So they were kind of like in their own bubble in that part of the world, which I really commend them. Now that I've worked in mainstream media and saw the flip side of the coin, I really commend them on doing that. But anyways, yeah, and also, I guess on this last whimsical reason, just to kind of wrap up, is that if any of you know the Studio Ghibli film Kiki's Delivery Service, that was also inspired by the island itself. So I have done a previous episode on this on which you can check out, which goes a bit more in depth about environmentalism, animation Studio Ghibli. But Kiki's Delivery Service, it doesn't really have to do with environmentalism, but it does have to do with basically if you've watched the movie or even read the book, which I've done both. It's basically about a young girl who's about to turn 13, and on her 13th birthday, of course, all witches have to go and become independent. They have to do their year in training somewhere abroad in a new, place that they choose for themselves. And they go through this training process, and yeah, I guess they become a magical witch after that, I guess, somehow. But yeah, Kiki's Delivery Service definitely inspired my choice as well, because not the book but the film itself that was released in 1989 originally, I believe, and it's on Netflix, of course, is of course inspired by the Hanseatic town of Visby, and parts of Stockholm also seep in there, but it's mostly Visby. So there's even this famous local tour, and I did that towards the end, which there's a tour guide who hosted there virtually and in person. And I didn't have the outfit for cosplay, unfortunately, but in retrospect, that would have been fun to do. But I went to the different locations within Visby, and you can definitely just imagine Kiki whizzing around on her broom somewhere. So there's just some nerd trivia for you there. But yeah, no, definitely if you've checked out the film Kiki's Delivery Service and I would definitely recommend doing the tour, and people specifically come to Visby and Island just specifically to be in that town to do the tour. And it's quite famous. It's known for other things like Pippi Longstocking, but my generation is more Kiki's Delivery Service. So yeah, I would always, during my commutes, imagine Kiki whizzing around on her magical broomstick with her trusty black cat Gigi. So it's definitely, it was whimsical in that sense. That's why I'm like, that's another, that's serendipity. That's another reason I have to go. But of course, that's just the cherry on top. You had these other practical reasons. It just happens to be, my all-time favorite childhood animated movie, Kiki's Delivery Service, this whimsical experience. It just made my experience more unwavering and whimsical in that sense. And it's nice because they had what I wanted to study, which is sustainable business management. So yeah, I definitely recommend checking out the tour and, of course, the film, and read the book, of course, and you'll kind of see the similarities there for sure. And yeah, I guess that's all I have for today. Hopefully this long drawn out in-depth spiel kind of has inspired you to possibly consider studying abroad, and of course committing to doing graduate school abroad. And I think grad school is nice because it's, again, you can find those shorter programs that are 1 year in duration, so it's not too much of a commitment. You can travel around the EU and hop on these different flights, and it's even affordable. And I didn't mention that, but I was paying much less in tuition despite it being international tuition, because as you know, Scandinavia up until recently, and unfortunately just about missed the mark, it was free tuition. So if you got into Norway or anywhere else, you wouldn't have to pay even as an international student, but they recently changed that policy, so you do have to pay. But still, even the fact that you have to pay, it's still considerably less than you would pay in the US, Canada, Australia, UK, these other places. At least I found it was, for business school, much more affordable. Just again, know what you're signing up for. It might not be the generic standard business curriculum, and if you want that, then I don't recommend it. I just suggest going and doing your MBA and an online MBA from whatever generic school sort of thing, because that's not what the program is meant for. When you go into the program, they really do want you to collaborate and have this immersive, wholesome experience where you're very much integrated, not into just the core curriculum, but with like collaborating with your classmates. And it's intended to be designed that way. That's why it's not a remote program, nor do I ever think they'll make it remote, because I had requested that towards the end when I had to jet off a bit. I asked to potentially jet off a bit earlier from the program, but it didn't end up happening. And of course, towards the end of the program, the defense for the thesis, it's more of a sustainability, I guess you can say more of a celebration, the sustainability symposium. So it's not the standard way we would see here again. It's more of like a celebratory thing, and they have this alumni weekend where people from around the world in the program come and visit and they mingle and stuff like that. So it's definitely an experimental business program. Management programs will go in that direction now that they're being rolled out. If you're not ready for the MBA, or you're more of a junior or novice, maybe these will become a viable option in the future. But yeah, just do your research and know what you're getting into, because despite me doing all the research and it being my third attempt and really considering whether I wanted to genuinely go back to school and go to graduate school, it still didn't turn out to be what I expected. So, and it's not necessarily like it is in the brochures. Yes, it was for my shorter exchanges because they were short. So there's not much of a learning curve, but for the longer program, for a year-long program, there's definitely a learning curve. There's definitely growing pains. So it's definitely more of a commitment. Just keep that in mind when you are considering going to graduate school. I think in the EU, maybe in Scandinavia specifically, even in Sweden, regardless of whatever subject you study, it doesn't have to be in sustainability. But yeah, that's all I have for you for now and for closing remarks. If you have any questions, you can always reach out to me, because I know I haven't exactly posted as much on my own experiences, but I would love to share any more insight if you are considering it, because I wish someone was there to tell me, especially someone from Canada or, North America, to tell me, this is my experience in the EU, because it's definitely a different mindset when you go there compared to English-speaking countries. Everything from the education system to lifestyle to even the people there, which I found to be more on the introverted side. And, Canadians were also, I would say, we're more friendly and extroverted, even though we have the similar temperament of Swedish people, or Scandinavian people, I guess you can say. But definitely reach out. I think that's the best way if you have any questions, comments, or concerns. If you are considering not just Uppsala University Campus Gotland or even this program, but if you want to study in that part of the world, I can definitely give my 2 cents on it. And I think it's better that you do a little bit of research before you commit to it. Okay, well, that's it for now. Again, this has been another episode of the Sustainable You docu-series, and be sure to like and subscribe, not just to this episode today, but in general, because we will be releasing more content soon. And also be sure to subscribe to our daily spiel newscast. So this is basically a leading source of the hottest sustainability trends of the day. So just to keep you in the loop, if you just want a little tidbit of knowledge every day, just click on one of those news bursts. We're on, of course, pretty much all the socials, from Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook and whatnot. So be sure to check that out and share and recommend and subscribe. Okay, thanks so much for listening, and catch you later. Thanks so much for tuning in to yet another eye-opening episode of Sustainable You. Again, this is an extraordinary and engaging info series whose purpose is to make sustainable development and sustainability accessible to the average person in their quest to quench their knowledge on environmentalism. Be sure to leave your feedback by liking this week's released edition and by subscribing to this podcast. Again, any love from our followers is much appreciated. Signing off until next time.